Recently, I lined this wall with some plasterboard sheets. And in this video, I'm going to show you step by step just how I did that. We're going to cover such things as what you've got to keep in mind when you select the sheets to suit your situation. The other thing is we'll be looking at how to measure up and how to cut the plasterboard. And finally, we'll look at where do you apply the stud adhesive and how often and where do you screw the sheet off to the wall. Standard ceiling heights in Australia are 2.4 metres high. So that requires two 1200mm wide sheets of plasterboard to fit in that space. So we'll just draw that in here. So we've got the first sheet down below, sheet 1, 1200 wide, and second sheet of plasterboard 1200 wide. Now that'll result in a recessed edge along the bottom and a recessed edge along the top edge of the sheet of plasterboard, and the second sheet will likewise have a recessed edge along the lower edge and a recessed edge along the top edge. If you're going to use cornice along the ceilings, around the ceilings, the cornice will cover the recessed edge around the top edge. So that'll save you having to plaster that joint. If you're going to use skirting board along the floor, most skirting boards are of a sufficient width to be able to cover over the recessed edge along the floor. However, you still need to hard plaster the recessed edge so that it's flat surface for the skirting board to sit against. Otherwise the skirting board will kick in at the base. So plasterboard, recessed edge, need to just base coat that. And of course you've got the two recessed edges here which you need to plaster as well. I bought two 2.4 metre long sheets, extra wide ones, 1350, so 1 metre 350mm wide, instead of the standard 1200 wide. You can get them 1350 wide. I'll tell you why. If I'd used two 1200 wide sheets, they wouldn't have quite come to the top of the ceiling, because my ceiling is 2.6 metres high. So two 1200 wide sheets of plasterboard would only go up to 2.4 metres high, which would mean I'd need to put another piece in the top, which would mean I'd have to fill in 3 joints instead of 2. So if I use 1350, so 1 metre 350 wide plasterboard sheets, that means I've got only one joint in the middle, and I'll trim off the recessed edge at the bottom of the 1350 sheet and the top of the 1350 sheet, and that'll leave me with just one joint in the middle to plaster up with soft plaster and hard plaster. So that's saving me a lot of work, getting two 1350mm wide sheets. So just think of that before you order your plasterboard. Try and save yourself some work. Now I'm going to measure the size for the plasterboard. $21.98. Make a mark on a piece of cardboard. Just double check, measure twice, cut once. So the wall goes out very, very slightly, and it's worth putting your level on the wall just to find out what the wall's doing. So when you cut the plasterboard, you can make an adjustment for that. Okay, I'll go and cut the plasterboard now. So the first bit of the plasterboard I'm going to cut off is the 50mm, which will sit down on the floor, because I don't need a recessed edge along the floor. $50, $50, $50, okay. So I'll bring my Stanley knife or craft knife out and I just run along that mark.
Out back with a hammer in hand.
So all I need to do now is tilt this forward and snap that piece down, roll it around the back and run the knife through the edge. And that's the piece that I don't need. Now I'm going to cut my width of the plasterboard, and I've got 2188 down the bottom. At the top, 2198. I'll just put one a bit lower down. So the level won't reach. Just line up the level with both marks. Run the knife along. This is where we just bring this board out. Put my knife ready. And I get this end bit that's scored on one side and just bend it around. And then I run this up on the inside, this knife. And that's the piece cut off that we don't need. If you do need to trim just a little bit off the edge, then you can use an old saw. Okay, that should be enough, I reckon. Okay, so that one's ready. I'll just shift it out of the way. This is where we come to the gluing stage, putting the stud adhesive on. I'm going to make a mark of the centre, roughly around here. And the idea is to put stud adhesive where you're not going to be screwing or nailing the board. Obviously, the least amount of screws or nails you put into the plasterboard, the less plastering you've got to do. So I'm going to be screwing here on the edge of the plasterboard because that's where the joint is, and has to be plastered anyway. And I'll be screwing the middle of the sheet, so I'll be putting 2 knobs of stud adhesive on each stud. So I'll do that now.
Phillips out back with a hammer in hand, turning old walls into something grand. Dust on his boots, plans in his head, tools all around and a vision ahead. Lisa's inside where the screens are aglow, cutting the clips so the story flows. Coffee in hand, headphones on tight, making magic on the timeline late at night.
So you've got the edge of the sheet is up this high. It's going to run all along the top here where the next sheet will join. And then you've got the floor. So I'll be screwing along the bottom plate there and screwing into each stud at the top edge, and I'll be screwing in the middle of the sheet. And so in between those screw locations is where the glue gets put on, or the stud adhesive gets put on. And you notice there's no stud adhesive on the ends because that's where you're going to screw up along the wall. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. I'll put the sheet on now. Just before I put that completely in, I'm just going to pack up one end. And I'll just keep the sheet level, so the floor must be out very slightly.
Building dreams from the ground. Phillips making sawdust while Lisa cuts the sound. From the workshop to the edit suite, we're making something real and sweet. Yeah, we fix it and film it. So come along and see this little YouTube world of ours where we make reality.
That's better. If you haven't already got a little rattler, they're worth getting. If you're going to do any amount of this sort of work, you want to get yourself a tool bag. So you've got your hammer nearby, you've got this that can sit in the pocket there, or hang off the edge, and you've got ready access to screws, plasterboard screws. So these are the 25-30mm plasterboard screws. Okay, so I'll start screwing the sheet off now. I've already made sure that the base of this board is in, because you don't want to screw it off until it's completely in. Okay, so I'm going to screw into the bottom plate now. Okay, up both sides now. Okay, that's the first sheet on. I've just got a couple of screws to put in the middle. And I'll just make a mark on there. So put the level in the middle of this stud and transfer the mark to the middle. So it's 1300 wide, so 650 will be the center. It's important when you're screwing these screws off to not break through the paper surface, otherwise you lose the strength. It's not going to hold the board in, it'll pull through. Obviously you need to drive them in far enough so they're flush with the surface. But no further than that. Okay, so that's sufficient. Right, so I've only got this and this to plaster, and then the joint along the middle. I might have a few screw positions, screw heads to plaster over along the edges if the cover strip doesn't cover it. Okay, so now we come to measuring the piece of plasterboard for the top part of the wall. And I'm going to first of all remind myself of what the wall's doing. In other words, if one wall is out, I want to try and cut the plasterboard to allow for that. Otherwise I'm going to be left with a big gap. Or if the wall's coming in and I've only measured at the bottom and I don't know the wall's coming in, it's not going to fit. So let's just see what's going on with the wall. So put the level on. Level's telling me that wall is nice and straight up and down. It's not kicking in at the bottom or the top. I'm going to put the level on this wall now and see what it's doing. And this wall is out by about 5 millimeters. Okay, so I'm going to measure from the other end, and the difference in measurement I'm going to take off this end so that the sheet of plasterboard is the right shape to fit in this wall that's slightly out. And I've got a level base to work off. Let's get our widths and work that out first. 22 is a tight fit, so we might go 21.97. 21.97. I've already got the shape of the wall on the cardboard. 21.97. So this is 2190 tight fit. So why don't we go 2187? Yeah, 2187. And now to do the height. Now the same deal, you want to know what your ceiling's doing. So I'm going to, in other words, what I mean is if your ceiling's bowing in the middle, you need to know that with the level. Or you can just measure it. But if it's going up at one side, you need to know that as well. You need to know what the ceiling's doing so you can cut the plasterboard to suit. So let's just see what this is doing. Well, that's pretty close to being level. A couple of mil out, but that's nothing. And we'll see what this end's doing. Yeah, this is a fair way out. So this is showing that the ceiling is going up higher than level mark by about 7 mil from the centre. Now that sounds a lot. It is a lot, but really you'd be surprised in how many old homes, and to tell you the truth, even newly constructed homes are not all that accurate, but no one ever sees it because it's too small an amount to be able to notice. I tell you who does notice when walls are out of square, and that's the tilers, because when they're laying the tiles, that shows up when the walls are not square. Okay, so we'll get some measurements on height. So 1287, and in the middle, a little bit of a gap, 1282, and up here in this end, this is where it'll get a bit longer, but higher, and 1289. So I'll go and cut that like the last one, like I showed you on the last one. Bring it in, and we'll see how accurately I've judged the measurements. I've cut the plasterboard sheet for here, and I'm just going to trim a bit off the top right hand corner because this beam here kicks in just at the top. So I'm just going to put the level on to work out how much to take off. Okay, so measuring down from the ceiling to about the bottom of the beam is about 10 mil actually. It's surprising, it's quite a lot. So the level's straight up and down. Yeah, it's 10 mil easily. So we need to make a mark 240, 250. I'm going to need to trim 10 or around about 12 mil off. So I'll measure down the depth of the beam, which was about 240, and I'll measure in 10 mil, and I'll go from 10 mil to nothing, and that'll cut out hopefully enough where the beam sticks in.
Yeah, we fix it and film it, so come along and see this little YouTube world of ours where we make reality. Feel us measuring twice to cut once clean, working out a way to build their dream. Patching, painting, leveling floors, always one job away from starting 10 more.
Okay, so I'm going to lift it up again because I lifted it up once and tried it already and I found that out. So I'm going to lift it up again. It's a big piece to lift on my own, but I don't have anyone else here to give me a hand, so I'm just got to go about it carefully and protect my back. So I'm going to lift it into position first. Okay, here goes. Still a bit tight. Okay, so it's still a bit tight. Whew. I think what I'm going to do is take off about 5 mil all the way. So I'm just going to mark on the ceiling where the studs are, the center of the studs. And I know where to nail, or screw rather, down here. Okay, so I'm going to have another trial run of seeing if this board will fit now that I've taken a little bit more off the board. I've trimmed a little bit off the sheet, so I'm going to try it in again. Yep, and that's going to fit. So that's good news. I'll drop it back down. Okay, I need to mark where the centers are. Measuring, what have we got here? 1300, so that's 650.
Trimming clips like a movie pro, adding the beats to the hammer blows, thumbnails popping, the title's tied, gonna post that upload later tonight. Oh, we fix it and film it, building dreams from the ground.
So what those marks are is they tell me where the center of the board is, so I know I need to put glue in 2 places here. Now I'm going to put the stud adhesive on, 2 knobs of stud adhesive between where I'm going to screw there and going to screw at the top of the board.
Phillips making sawdust while Lisa cuts the sound. From the workshop to the edit suite, we're making something real and sweet. Yeah, we fix it and film it, so come along and see this little YouTube world of ours where we make reality.
This is where you could do with someone to give you a hand. If not, make sure you've eaten your spinach. Got muscles like Popeye then. That's the plan. There we are, it's in place nicely. So I just need to put a couple of screws in to keep it safe from falling off.
Igniting a flame across the nations for DIY home transformations. With every job done, a story's told, turning everyday life into solid gold. Oh, we fix it and film it. That's the life we choose. Philip builds the future, and Lisa makes the view. So just hit that like and stick around. There's always a fix to be found. Yeah, we fix it and film it. So just you wait and see. This little YouTube channel is a home for you and me.
All done.